The hull was too wide for the bay doors, and nobody closed them anyway. It sat half in, half out, plating scored white in long, ragged lines, one hull plate gone entirely and replaced with a patch job that didn't match the color. A chunk of grey rock, the size of a fist, was still wedged into a seam near the forward turret, sparking faintly every few seconds where a live wire touched it. Nobody had pulled it out yet. Nobody had touched anything. 5 captains stood in a row in front of it, and none of them were laughing now. 6 days ago, these same 5 had watched a tactical map fill with fleet icons, had seen the blocky human silhouette drop into the display among the sleek curves of everyone else's ships, and had laughed until Drosk had to raise a hand for quiet. Now they stood under the shadow of the thing they'd laughed at, and the only sound in the bay was the drip of coolant hitting the deck plate in a slow, steady rhythm, and the hiss of the airlock cycling open. Captain Voss stepped out. A burn scar ran along her jaw, still shiny, still healing. She didn't salute. She didn't smile. Sirin spoke first, voice smaller than any of them had heard it. My people were in those vessels. All of them survived. Good, Voss said. Drosk's eyes moved from the scar to the wedged rock to the mismatched patch, cataloguing damage the way he catalogued everything. Why did you take the rock impacts, he said, instead of going around? Because the convoy was in there, Voss said. We needed to reach them. The rock was in the way, going through cost us hull plating. You accepted that exchange. We calculated it, Voss said, and we accepted it, yes. Drosk said nothing else. His left hand, the one that never moved, was moving. What I keep coming back to isn't the ship. It's the math. Somebody sat down before any of it happened and decided a hull plate was worth less than a life. Written down, signed off on. I still don't know how long that takes to decide something like that and mean it. 6 days earlier, none of them had known Captain Voss's name. The conclave chamber smelled the way it always did during a session, ozone from the projector coils and something faintly sweet from the Thely's seating pods. Captain Roland Sorvath sat where he always sat, third seat from the left, close enough to watch Drosk run the room and far enough to stay out of it. His command ring turned once under his thumb, an old habit, a way to keep his hands busy while his mouth stayed shut. The tactical display came up clean. Every major fleet in the corridor dispute rendered in silver light, ship by ship, class by class. Voron cruisers in tight formation, all sharp lines and matched angles. Sorathi hunters spread wide, fast and thin. Thely's interceptors like a scatter of blades. Durak swarmcraft in their patient clusters. Keshari scouts, small and quick. Then someone added the human ships, and the room changed. It sat there, blocky and inelegant, a city welded to an engine, among the sleek silver curves of every other fleet. Squared edges. No visible weapons array worth mentioning. A hull shape a first-year cadet could have drawn. Orvin leaned in first, reading the specs off the side panel, and started laughing before he finished the sentence. Armor rating, he said, tapping the number twice. That's not a warship. That's excessive. The room laughed with him. Even Heave, who rarely reacted to anything, made a low, clicking sound that in Durak meant amusement. Sirin didn't bother reading the specs at all. She just looked at the shape and said, It looks obsolete, slow, like something we retired 2 generations ago. They didn't retire it, Orvin said. They built it like that on purpose. That got a bigger laugh than the first one. Commander Aldrich Thorne sat in the observer section, 3 rows back, where humanity's opinion carried no weight in a session dividing corridors humanity hadn't been invited to claim. He didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He stood, walked to the side table, poured water into a scratched metal cup, and sat back down without a word. Roland watched him do it, filed it away. A man who could sit through that kind of room and not change his face at all, that was its own kind of statement, and Roland didn't yet know what it was saying. Drosk called the session back to order, and for the next hour the corridors got divided the way corridors always got divided, piece by piece, species by species, humanity getting nothing because humanity, according to the record, hadn't formally asked. Nobody in the room thought that was strange. Nobody asked Aldrich if he wanted to ask. Near the end of the session, a message came through on Aldrich's terminal. Priority routing, triple encryption, the kind of flag that meant somebody on the other end had pushed a button they didn't push often. He read it, 10 seconds, maybe less. His face didn't move. He typed a reply, 4 words. Then he closed the terminal and looked back up at the display, at the corridors still being carved apart, and said nothing to anyone. Roland noticed that too. He didn't know yet that it mattered. He only knew that a man who drank water from a scratched cup and answered a priority alert in 10 seconds without so much as a raised eyebrow was either very good at hiding something or had already decided there was nothing here worth reacting to. Let them keep talking, Aldrich thought, and didn't say it out loud. The clip of the laughter made it off the station before the session even ended. Somebody's aide had recorded 30 seconds of Orvin calling the human armor rating excessive, and by the time the corridors were fully divided and the delegates were filing out, it had already reached 11 different alien news networks, subtitled, captioned, set to music on at least 2 of them. Aldrich didn't watch it. He was 3 decks down by then, in the human liaison office, reading a footnote buried at the bottom of a routine signals report. 3 ISV-class vessels conducting scheduled patrol sweeps of the outer transit corridors. Nothing urgent, nothing flagged. Just 3 ships doing what 3 ships did every rotation, moving slow through empty space. Nobody else wanted to bother patrolling. He read it once, said nothing, and moved to the next line. Roland, back in his own quarters, pulled up the clip against his better judgment. He watched Orvin laugh. He watched Sirin call the ships obsolete. He watched, at the very edge of the frame, a grey-uniformed man walk to a side table and pour water like none of it touched him. He rotated the ring on his thumb and thought about the 4 words Aldrich had typed and never explained, and felt, for reasons he couldn't yet name, that the joke wasn't finished being told. The message that reached the conclave 3 hours later came in on an open emergency channel, which meant everyone heard it at once. A rogue Sorathi faction, Vesk's faction, the one Roland's own fleet command had quietly stopped answering messages from 6 months back, had hit a civilian mining conv in the Durath corridor. 4 vessels, unarmed, hauling ore and nothing else. One was already dead in space. The other 3 were pinned against a wall of asteroid debris with no clear path out. Roland felt his stomach drop before his mind caught up with the numbers. His faction. His fault, in the way that these things become the fault of whoever's flag the attacker used to fly under. The 5 captains didn't laugh this time. Sirin had her tactical officer running numbers before the alert finished playing. "My fastest cruisers," she said, 7 hours out. She said it like a fact she hated. "My destroyers can do 6, Drosk said. His voice had lost its usual clean edge. "The convoy has an escort vessel, damaged, life support failing." A pause, longer than he usually allowed himself. 2 hours, maybe less, before that ship stops being a ship people can rescue. Nobody said the math out loud, because the math didn't need saying. 6 hours was too slow. 7 hours was worse. 2 hours was what they had, and nothing in the room could close that gap. Heave's fingers moved fast over his console, distributed the way Durak always worked, 3 tasks at once. Nearest Keshari scout wing, 4 hours, still too slow. Orvin had gone quiet, which for Orvin was its own kind of alarm. Aldrich stood up from the observer section. Nobody stopped him. Nobody was watching him closely enough to stop him. Every eye in the room was on the tactical display, on the shrinking countdown next to the dying escort ship's life support readout. He walked out through the side door without a word, and the door closed behind him soft enough that only Roland noticed it happen at all. 40 seconds. That was all it took. Roland knew because he was counting without meaning to, the way you count a held breath. Aldrich came back in, sat down, picked up his cup, said nothing. "Where did you go?" Roland asked him, quiet enough that it wouldn't carry. "Made a call," Aldrich said. "To who?" Aldrich didn't answer that. He looked at the display instead, at the countdown, at the small dot marking the dying escort ship, and for the first time since Roland had started watching him, something in his face had gone very still in a different way than before. Not blank, waiting. I've replayed that 40 seconds 100 times since. What do you say in 40 seconds that changes a 2-hour trip into something else entirely? I asked him eventually. He told me. 4 words, the same 4 words from the message 6 days before. I'll get to those. The escort ship's captain, a Keshari woman named Aura, though none of them knew her name yet, sent one more transmission before her comms started failing. Static cut, half garbled, but the words came through clear enough. Hull breach, deck 4. We have children aboard. Overhauler families, please. Sirin's hands were flat on the console, not moving, and for a moment Roland thought about a name he didn't have yet, a small habit he'd never learn, a face on one of those Overhauler manifests that meant nothing to him and would have meant everything to somebody. The convoy wasn't a number. It had never been a number. It had just been easier to think of it that way until the word children came through the static. The countdown kept sliding. 90 minutes. Then the sensor grid picked up 3 contacts, moving fast, converging on the corridor from a heading none of the captains had positioned anyone to cover. Identify, Drosk said. The tactical officer's voice cracked slightly. Human, ISV class, 3 vessels. The room went silent, in a way it hadn't gone silent all week. That's not possible, Orvin said. Their nearest fleet position was, he stopped, recalculated again. That's not possible, he said again, quieter. Aldrich didn't look surprised. Aldrich didn't look anything at all. He just watched the 3 dots close the distance on the display, faster than any published human cruising speed should have allowed, and took a slow sip from his scratched metal cup. Roland looked at him, then at the display, then back at him. You knew, Roland said. I read a footnote, Aldrich said. 6 days ago, 3 ISV-class vessels scheduled patrol sweep out of transit corridors. I didn't know they'd be needed. I knew where they were. That's not the same as knowing. No, Aldrich agreed. It's better. It means they're always somewhere. The 3 human battleships hit the edge of the asteroid belt at the 90-minute mark and didn't slow down. Vesk, watching his own sensor feed from deep inside the rock field, opened a channel. His voice came through hard and flat, a man used to being obeyed. This is a contested engagement, he said. Withdraw or be fired upon. There was a pause, 3 full seconds of dead air, long enough that Vesk started to repeat himself. Then a woman's voice answered, calm in a way that had nothing to do with being unafraid and everything to do with having already decided what happened next. You have 30 seconds to release the civilian conv, she said. We will not ask twice. Roland felt the ring stop, turning under his thumb. He hadn't noticed his hand had gone still. Who is that? Sirin asked, to no one, to everyone. Aldrich looked at the display, at the lead human ship's transponder tag scrolling past. Captain Voss, he said. ISV Cradle. He said it the way you'd read off a weather report, and it was the most words Roland had heard him volunteer all week. 30 seconds, ticked down on a dozen screens across the conclave chamber. Vesk didn't release the conv. The human ships didn't stop. They went into the belt. The cradle took the first impact before its shields even had time to react. A slab of rock the size of a shuttle, and the hull barely trembled. Vesk watched his own targeting screen and didn't understand what he was looking at. His gunners fired everything they had into the belt, tracking 3 moving heat signatures that refused to evade, refused to slow, refused to do anything but keep coming straight through the debris field like the rocks weren't there at all. Concentrate fire, he snapped. All batteries, forward vessel. Plasma bolts lit the belt orange. The cradle's point defense answered in a rhythm too fast to individually count, deleting incoming fire round for round, and what got through hit armor that didn't buckle the way armor was supposed to buckle. Their damage tolerance calculations, Heave said slowly, watching the readouts scroll past in the conclave chamber, must be entirely different from ours. Nobody answered him. Nobody could look away from the display long enough to. The Cradle didn't return fire at Vesk's ships. Not yet. Instead, its secondary batteries turned on the rock formation Vesk's lead vessel was sheltering behind, and the formation came apart in a slow, deliberate collapse. Not a wild barrage, but a controlled dismantling, one section at a time, the way a demolition crew takes down a building it doesn't want falling in the wrong direction. "They're not hunting the ships," Orvin said. He sounded like a man watching something he didn't have language for yet. "They're removing the cover." Vesk's second vessel lost its shelter first. Two of the Cradle's escorts converged on the opening before the dust had finished settling, and the ship's engine flared, tried to reposition, and took a hit across its aft section that sent it tumbling out of formation, venting atmosphere in a long silver plume. Roland's hand had stopped moving on the ring entirely. He was gripping it now. "That's the second one," Sirin said. "Two ships, gone in," she checked the timestamp, "under 4 minutes." Vesk's voice came back over the open channel, and for the first time since the hail began, it had lost its edge. "This is a contested engagement. You are firing on Sovereign." "You're firing on a civilian convoy," Voss said, flat, unhurried. "We're removing your ability to keep doing that." The third rock formation went next, and behind it, Vesk's remaining ships had nowhere left to hide. I want to say I understood in that moment what I was watching. I didn't. What I understood was smaller than that, just that every assumption I'd built about their fleet over 4 years of joint exercises and shared briefings had been built on the wrong information, and I didn't yet know how wrong. 200 kilometers from the fighting, in a corridor already clear, the escort ship Aura commanded drifted with its life support flickering on backup power. She'd stopped transmitting 10 minutes ago, not because she'd given up, but because she'd run out of anything useful to say and didn't want to waste the last of her comms saying it. Her sensor board pinged. A single contact, breaking off from the main engagement, moving toward her position at a speed that made her double-check the reading. She braced for the worst kind of surprise. What she got instead was a hail, human-coded, and a voice that sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the fight behind it. "Escort vessel, this is ISV Haven, inbound for medical transfer. Hold your position, we've got you." Aura didn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking too hard. "Understood," she finally said. "Understood, thank you." The children in the aft compartment, the ones who'd been kept quiet with promises for the last 3 hours, heard their mothers start crying and thought, briefly, that something had gone wrong. Nothing had gone wrong. Everything, for the first time since the ambush started, had gone right. Back in the conclave chamber, the display had gone from chaos to something closer to arithmetic. 2 of Vesk's ships destroyed. His cover systematically removed, formation by formation, until there was nothing left between his remaining hull and open space. He held out for another 90 seconds, long enough to try one more maneuver, a dive toward a fourth rock cluster that the Cradle's escort ships closed off before he reached it, and then his weapons went silent. "Vesk's transmitting a surrender code," the tactical officer said, disbelief still thick in her voice. Aldrich set his cup down. It was the first sound he'd made in 10 minutes. He've pulled up something on his own console, a request he'd clearly been building since the fight started, and read it twice before speaking. He had the total number of human ships in active service pulled up beside their fleet class listings, and he read the figure once, silently, and then read it again. "It is not the largest fleet in the corridor," he said finally, to no one in particular. "It is not close to the largest fleet in the corridor." He paused, and something in his usual patient rhythm had gone uneven. "It is all one class of ship." Orvin looked over at that. "What does that mean?" "It means," Heave said, "that whatever we just watched 3 of those ships do is not a specialized capability. It is not their elite unit. It is what an ordinary human patrol ship does when someone needs saving." He set the display down slowly, like it had gotten heavier while he was reading it. There are hundreds more of them. The room went quiet in a way it hadn't gone quiet all week, and this time nobody filled the silence with laughter. Drosk's left hand had a visible tremor now, small but constant, and for a man who had never lost a simulated engagement in his career, the sight of a real one going away none of his frameworks had predicted seemed to be costing him something he wasn't used to paying. Commander Thorne, he said, and it was the first time all week he'd used the title instead of just a name. The 4 words. The reply you sent 6 days ago to the priority message. What did it say? Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked his cup back up, drank the last of the water in it, and set it down empty. I'll tell you at the dock, he said. Not here. The engagement feed was still playing live, on every screen in the chamber, the last of the debris field settling, the cradle's running lights steady against the dark. Vesk's surrendered vessel drifting powerless, while a boarding team crossed the gap between them. Nobody in the room was laughing at the shape of the human ships anymore. Nobody was calling anything about them excessive. Rilan realized, watching it, that the joke had never really been about the ships at all. It had been about assumption, about 5 captains who had looked at a design and measured it against their own war colleges, their own doctrines, their own idea of what a warship was supposed to look like, and had never once considered that somewhere out past the corridors they controlled, somebody had built ships around a different question entirely. Not how do we win fastest. Just how do we make sure nobody dies waiting for us. He rotated the ring on his thumb, slower now, and for the first time all week didn't have anything sharp to think about it. The dock bay hadn't changed since the last time anyone had looked at it. The cradle still sat too wide for the doors, coolant still dripped from the same seam, and the fist-sized rock still sparked when nobody had pulled it free. Sirin walked up first this time, close enough to put a hand flat against the scarred plating. My people were in those vessels, she said again, quieter than before. All of them survived. Good, Voss said. I am in your debt. You would have gotten there, Voss said, in 4 hours. Then it wasn't your fault it took 2. Voss almost smiled at that. Almost. Drosk stepped forward, and his left hand, still trembling faintly, went to the mismatched patch near the forward turret. He didn't ask the question he'd asked before. Sirin had already gotten the why. He asked a different one. Your fleet philosophy, he said. It prioritizes the mission over the ship's survival. My command academy teaches the opposite. Preserve the vessel, preserve the crew, complete the mission if the first 2 conditions allow it. He looked at the hull, at the rocks still wedged in the seam. How do you win wars this way? Voss considered that. We don't always win faster, she said. We just don't leave people behind while we're deciding how. Drosk had no answer for that one. His hand, for the first time since Rilan had started watching it, went still. Aldrich stepped past both of them and stood directly in front of Voss. He didn't offer a handshake. She didn't expect one. 4 words, Drosk said from behind him. You said you'd tell me at the dock. Aldrich reached into his coat and pulled out the same terminal from 6 days before, the priority message still open on the screen. He turned it so Drosk could read it. Simple routing header, simple flag, and below it, his reply, unchanged since the moment he'd sent it. Hold the patrol line. Drosk read it twice. That's it, that's the entire message. It's a standing order, Aldrich said. Somebody asked if the ISV-class ships assigned to the Durath sweep should be recalled, given the corridor dispute, given that we hadn't been granted access to it. He looked at the display screen, at the 4 words that had sat there unremarked for 6 days, while a room full of captains laughed at a ship silhouette. I told them to hold position, keep patrolling, same rotation, same route. He put the terminal away. I didn't know the ambush was coming. Nobody did. I just didn't see a reason to move ships that weren't in anyone's way. Rilan finally spoke, and it was the first thing he'd said aloud in over an hour. You didn't predict this. No, Aldrich said. Then it's luck. It's a patrol route, Aldrich said. It was always going to be somewhere. This time, somewhere mattered. The escort captain, Aura, was released from the medical bay 2 decks up in time to see the last of it. 5 alien captains standing in a loose half-circle around a human battleship, none of them laughing, one of them with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. She didn't come down to join them. She stood at the railing above, holding a blanket around her shoulders, and watched the children from her conv chase each other around a support column while their mothers finally let themselves sit down. Nobody had counted the children. Nobody needed to. There'd been 14 names on the manifest and 14 names crossed off the casualty list, and that was the only number from the whole week that Aldrich actually cared to remember. The conclave reconvened 2 hours later, and the agreements that had divided the corridors 6 days ago were already signed, already filed, already irreversible. Nobody moved to reopen them. But Drosk, running the session the way he always ran it, did something he had never done in 4 years of Aldrich sitting in the observer section. He gave him the floor. "Commander Thorne," Drosk said, "the room would like to hear from you." Aldrich stood. He didn't reach for notes. He didn't need any. "We got lucky on timing," he said. "The crew did their job. Captain Voss doesn't need this room to tell her that, and neither do I." He paused, looked around at 5 captains who 6 days ago had called his fleet's ships obsolete, excessive, slow. "That's all I have." He sat back down. Orvin was the first to break the silence that followed, and when he spoke it wasn't a joke. "I'm filing a revised assessment of human naval architecture," he said, "effective immediately." He've requested a formal military exchange program before the session closed. Sirin proposed a joint patrol arrangement for the Durath corridor, human ships included, and nobody in the room objected. Relan had already sent a private message to Admiral Cresser before he'd even sat back down, 3 lines, an apology for his faction's actions, and a question he'd never expected to ask a human admiral. "What do you think when you receive a call like that?" The reply came back within the hour. Short, plain, "That's what we're here for." Relan read it twice, the way Heave had read the fleet numbers twice, and put his terminal away without comment. The ISV Cradle left the dock 3 days later, patched, unremarkable, already back on rotation. It didn't get an escort. It didn't get a formal send-off. It moved out through the same transit lane it always used, slow, blocky, graceless against the sharper hulls still docked around it, and nobody laughed as it went. Relan watched it go from the observation deck, alone this time, his ring still on his hand, but his thumb finally at rest. The tactical display in the conclave chamber still ran the standing fleet overview, updated automatically, unchanged in its shape. The same blocky silhouette sat there among the sleek silver curves of every other fleet, still sitting where it had decided to be, still there, still waiting. Nobody had ordered it removed. Nobody had ordered it changed. It was just a patrol route. It was always going to be somewhere. That was the whole point. Just being there, just in case.